Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the RCI GDAS webinar. It is titled, Dealing with Conflict in Families Living with Dementia and Disabilities. And this morning it'll be presented by Dr. Francine Russo. Before we get started, let's cover a few conference details. If you have a question during the conference, we ask that you type in the question. All questions will be answered by Dr. Russo at the end of the conference. Also, if you are at your own computer station, a post-test survey will pop up at the end of the webinar. There will be 10 questions about the webinar and personal information questions such as name and email address that will enable me to send you your certificate. If you are not at your own computer, copy down the link that will be posted on the last slide of this presentation. Use the link at your own computer to complete the post-test. Certificates will be sent within 1 week after closing of the test. Please complete this test by February the 28th to receive your certificate. We are now ready to begin. Good morning, Dr. Russo.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Now, do you want me to begin, or is there a little bit of more introduction?
No, ma'am, that is all.
Well, good morning, everyone. Now, coping with parents aging is something we expect to be hard. Maybe not as hard as it turns out to be, but hard. But my question today is, why do siblings have so much trouble with each other? Let me give you a few statistics. By the way, yes, there can be a comical side to this, although it may not seem funny at the time. So let me give you a few statistics. Many of them may be familiar to you, but I'd like to juxtapose them in a slightly different way than you may be used to. Now, over 44 million people are caring for an aging relative, and of those, over 20 million are caring for parents. Now, listen to these stats. 91% of these adult child caregivers say they do not share parent care equally with anyone. 51% say they do it alone. Yet we know that 85% of them have siblings. So if you are seeing a little sibling tension or issues or conflict around you, these statistics can begin to explain it. And if you're experiencing some tensions in your own families, that wouldn't be surprising either, because sibling tensions are becoming an epidemic. Now, I know that most of you listening here are professionals, but I'm going to speak to you today mostly as adult children and siblings, because that will drive my points home in a more direct and personal way, so you can better understand what caregivers are experiencing. But also, if you're dealing with this in your own families, as many professionals have told me, you can know a lot, but when it's your family, all bets are off. So, maybe you've seen it. Maybe you've been one of these caregivers who lament, no one will help me. Sisters and brothers who complain their caregiver's sister is shutting them out. She won't let me help. White knights who fly in to save mom from a fate worse than death. Their sister. Siblings at war. It's bubbling up in the zeitgeist like never before. What is going on? Now, I come at this from a special perspective. I'm not a social worker or a therapist. I don't have clients that I serve or specific problems to fix. I'm a journalist. My job is to identify trends, and when I do, to figure out the answer or answers to that question. What's going on in society, in families, the big picture, and all the intimate little pictures that make up the big pictures. But like you, I'm not just a professional, just a journalist. I'm a person, a daughter, a sister, and as with many trends that I would write about in Time magazine, this one began to bubble up in my own life first. So I'd like to share with you my own personal story, about how this all went down in my family. And boy, would I like to tell you that I handled this really well. But I can't do that. Everything I would eventually put in my book, They're Your Parents Too, I had no idea. I was completely clueless. I was a sister who lived far away and was uninvolved. I would call my folks every Sunday, and I would go down a couple hours away and visit every few months. And I would keep my visits pretty short. To tell you the truth, things weren't very comfortable in my family. There was a lot of guilt, a lot of anger, and my mom, well, she wasn't what you'd call a loving person. She was harsh, judgmental, negative. She was hard to be around. My dad, he was really sweet, but he took whatever she dished out and he worshiped her. Now, my younger sister, I have to tell you, she would have a completely different view of this for me, and her view is just as valid as mine. But I believe that from the day she was born, she was pissed off at me. She was convinced she got the short end of the stick. And, maybe she did. But I got to tell you, in my family, neither end of the stick was a prize. So that's the way things were in my family when my mom started failing. She was in a nursing home the last year of her life, and it was my sister helping my dad through it. For me, not really very much changed. I had my own complicated life in New York City. I was widowed, raising kids, and working. But the really important thing is that no one actually asked me to do anything, and I didn't volunteer. The only thing that changed was the emotional temperature in my family. It used to be that my mom always would say, "You never come," which was how my mom said hello. And now it was my sister, like as if she were channeling my mom. Same words, same tone of voice. "You never come." And me, what did I do? Well, I did what I had learned to do my entire life. I just deflected. I held them off. It wasn't until my mom's funeral, standing apart really, and seeing my dad and my sister sobbing, clinging together, holding each other up, that I got my first taste of this horrible ordeal they had been through without any support from me. And I felt terribly ashamed. I was instantly much better with my dad in his last years, but I kept asking myself, how did I get this so wrong? Because I'm not a terrible person. Honestly, I'm not. And while I was seeing this in my own life, as a writer on the Boomer Beat at Time magazine, I started seeing so many other siblings in trouble in the same ways, in different ways, and I began doing what journalists do, investigating to find out what's going on. So here's what I did. I interviewed more than 50 siblings, sometimes as many as 5 from the same family. You want to hear 5 different stories? I heard them. I looked at the complex motivations the sibling caregivers brought to the roles, the patterns of communications between family members, constructive, less so, and the kind that blows families apart. And I also looked at the role of their parents in being a helpful model or not, aiding communication or fomenting conflict, because that happens. I found out what they did right, what got them into trouble, what they longed for, and what they got. I also looked at the academic research from every field that might pertain to this: gerontology, sociology, psychology, medicine, looking at family dynamics, caregiving, favoritism. Here's one little tidbit. One study found that 40% of caregiving daughters thought some other child was their parent's favorite. I also talked to the best practitioners in the field, the folks in the trenches who work with families of the aging every day, maybe like some of you listening, social workers, geriatric care managers, family therapists, psychologists, hospice counselors, clergy, elder care attorneys. As a journalist, I synthesized all this in the Your Parents Too to help explain the difficult emotional relationship of adult siblings now with their parents and why it can get so ferocious and how to navigate it, not just over caregiving, which is huge, but all the issues that come up over this time: driving, medical decisions, who gets the power of attorney over finances and health, right through dementia, end-of-life decisions, including death, mourning, inheritance, and to what I call the sibling generation. Because, as you all know, this time can be hard, but there's also good news for families. There are opportunities for deep satisfaction for the caregivers and their siblings, for personal growth big time, and for closeness and connection with parents and children, siblings with each other, even when the history makes that seem not very likely. So, why is this so challenging for families, and why now? First of all, this whole passage is new. A generation or two ago, we just didn't go through this long period of taking care of aging parents. Now, I don't have to tell you about the incredible increase in longevity, but just briefly, our parents are living 30 more years than people did a couple of generations ago, and that's a greater increase than in the previous 5,000 years. Now, this is different from my grandma, and it might be different from yours. Now, my grandma lived to be what they called old. That is, she got to be 80. And if your grandma was anything like mine, well, she was probably pretty healthy most of that time. Maybe she got sick toward the end. Maybe she went in the hospital, and then grandma died. But now, and if she did need care, well, she probably had a housewife daughter who lived near her and would care for her. But now, as you all know, because of the miracles of medical science and a lot of other things, people aren't just living longer. They're living longer with chronic conditions for which they need help. But because of all the social revolutions of the 20th century, women as well as men are in the workplace. We live all over the country and the world, and we have very complicated family lives. So first of all, this is new. And what's really important about this newness is that families have no model for how to do this. There's no script for who should do what or how to do it. And everybody in the family is trying to figure it out and struggling. Everybody is struggling, even when they don't look like it. And I have found in my studies of families that having compassion for each other's struggles, even when people aren't behaving so well, can be a huge factor in helping the family get through this. So the first thing is this is new. The second thing, and this is really the heart of my book and of what I want to say to you today, this is not just a practical crisis that families are going through, although, as you know, the practical issues can be daunting. But it's also a major emotional passage for the family and for each person in the family. For the family, it's a new kind of family transition. Never before have siblings had to get together again and re-engage intimately, intensely, and long-term over the needs of their aging parents. And this after not living in the same household for 40 years. You know those movies that come out every Christmas, Home for the Holidays. Everybody gets under the same roof, and everybody goes back to acting the way they did when they were 10. Well, that's what families do. When we get together, we become who we were when we were most intimately connected. Now, growing up, everybody's family has a way of working. Now, family dynamics are very, very complex, and I wouldn't ever want to oversimplify it, but I do want to give you a very simplified example. Everyone in the family has a role. several roles really. Some are obvious, some are deeply hidden. But let's say in one family, Dad made all the important decisions. And Mom calmed everybody down when they were fighting. If one of you is the older kid or the responsible one, well, that person's role might be to take charge, look after the little ones, be responsible. Little kid's job, look to others to tell you what to do, and maybe some other role like making people laugh when things get tense. Okay, everybody does their part, family keeps on keeping on, it works. Well, fast forward 40 years, maybe, and family needs to work together over an aging parent. Everybody goes into automatic, and guess what? Those old roles don't work anymore. If Dad made all the important decisions, well, maybe he died 5 years ago. If Mom calmed everybody down when they were fighting, well, maybe she's too frail now or has dementia. If an older sister starts doing everything, which is very common, she could feel overwhelmed, exhausted, resentful, and a lot of other things. And the little kid might feel clueless, guilty, or the person who is a little kid might feel, I'm the best person to take care of this, but no one will let me. Whatever the reasons for these roles, and parents often assign them arbitrarily, which kid was born first, or reminds Mom of her sister whom she liked or didn't like, or which kid is most like Dad and how Mom feels about Dad, and on and on. Whatever the reasons, everyone, all the kids are now grown-ups, and everyone needs to adapt their old roles to new times. Well, that's a crisis for the family. But as if that weren't enough, every person in the family, each of us, each of you, and I say you because this is a universal experience. Each of us is going through one of our biggest emotional crises, really, as human beings. To watch our parents decline and die, and peeking out right behind that, our own mortality, up close and personal, in a whole new way. It's huge. And seeing time with our parents running out stirs up some really old and deep feelings. Anything we ever needed from them, to be loved just the way we wanted. And who really gets it exactly the way we want? To have it finally acknowledge that you're just as smart or just as important as your older brother, or that who you are as a person is okay. And it's not just the caregiver or one sister feeling this, it's every person in the family. And then suddenly, rising from the deep, this thing people thought they put behind them decades ago, rising from the deep, sibling rivalry, it's back. Now, it may not be conscious. Very often people aren't conscious of this, but this kind of sibling rivalry really infects all of the family interactions. Let me give you an example. Let's say that two sisters are talking about having a discussion. Is Mom safe at home, or should she move to assisted living? And that discussion becomes very heated. And finally that discussion boils over, and one of them is thinking, maybe even saying, you don't care about Mom. You don't care if she falls in that old house and dies. Whoa. When the temperature gets that high, that's a clue that people need to step back, and you can help them step back and figure out what's really going on, because if they can understand the feelings that are what this argument is really about, that can help them make better choices, because very often this argument is not just about where Mom will live. It's about which one of us understands Mom best, which one of us will be most important now, which one of us will be most loved. And when people understand that, that can help them clear the way to deal with the real issues. Now, there's many, many challenges for families at this time, but one of the biggest is how to communicate when their old roles kick in, and also the old communication patterns that they learned in their families. Because we also bring with us what we learned in our families about how to talk, what we can say, what it's okay to talk about, what it's not. Now, I'd like to give you an example. I tell this story in Chapter 5 of my book, which I call We Weren't Your Norman Rockwell Family. By the way, there was nobody I met in all my researches that felt they had grown up in this ideal family. So, sister and brother, Stan and Leslie, very nice people, really liked each other, and very affectionate, and yet they ran into troubles. The communication style they learned from their immigrant parents was this: we don't make a big deal of our problems, and we stand on our own 2 feet. So, for example, if Dad had surgery, they wouldn't tell the adult kids till after he got out of the hospital. Mom, why didn't you tell us Dad was in the hospital? I didn't want to make a big deal. So that's the way they learned to deal with problems and to talk about them in their family. Now, Mom was gone at this point. Dad had Parkinson's, and Stan was his caregiver. He put him in a nursing home right down the street from his house, and he went every day. He was absolutely devoted and proud to be his dad's caregiver. Now, he understood that his sister Leslie, who lived several states away, had a full plate. Her husband had died. She had teenage kids who were acting out, and he understood that he was going to be doing this, and he was okay with it. But as the years passed and his dad declined, and he began to feel hurt that his sister was not more in touch. He assumed if my sister cared about me, if she cared about Dad, well, she would be more in touch. And his hurt and his anger grew. And then Leslie did come in for a visit. They went to see Dad, and then he took her to his house. And after dinner, he said, "Come with me." Took her into his study, pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk, overflowing with papers and documents for their dad. He pointed and he yelled, look what we deal with on a monthly basis." Well, Leslie went home. A couple weeks later, I called her, and she said, "It hit me like a ton of bricks. What sacrifices my brother was making. I felt so guilty." And I asked her, "Well, what did you do?" And she said, I didn't do anything. I didn't know what I could do from so far away. And then just as we were talking, she suddenly began to bubble up with ideas. I know. I could take a couple of days off and fly in for a long weekend and give Stan and his wife a vacation. And as she began to get ideas, I could hear this weight of guilt lift off and a note of joy creep into her voice. The very next day, her brother Stan called me and said, "Guess what? My sister called me, and she thanked me for everything I was doing for Dad and asked what she could do." He said, "You know what? That's really all I wanted." Well, that isn't all caregivers want. It's not always that easy by a long shot. But there are some lessons in this. Why didn't Leslie know to give Stan the emotional support that so many caregivers need, that all the research, including my own, say can make a huge difference in the sibling relationship and how caregivers feel? The feeling that they're in it together, that they're not alone. And why didn't Stan know that telling his sister how she could help would be a gift? Well, because of the things I've mentioned before. This is new, and families have no model for how to do this. And our old family roles and communication styles kick in automatically even when they're not very helpful. But they also fell into some common communication traps, as did I and my sister, as do so many people, which, if you're aware of them, if you folks make siblings aware of them, they have a much better chance of avoiding them, because every family interaction is between two people at least. And even a small change in one person's attitude can have a big effect on the whole interaction. Trap 1. Now this is for the whole family. This is waiting until there's a crisis before talking about who will do what and how things will be handled. And because if you wait till there's a crisis, everybody will kick into automatic and the family will not operate well. Not including everyone in the early talks is a mistake a lot of families make. So many people say, oh, my sister really doesn't care. My brother, he just couldn't be less interested. But I guarantee you that, a few years from now, when the caregiver is making decisions, that sister or brother is going to fly in and say, you're doing it wrong. Why didn't you include me? It's a recipe for bitterness. Everyone should at least be invited into these discussions, even if they decide not to come. Trap 2. This is for siblings of caregivers. Thinking that caring for a parent is simply doing a series of concrete tasks. And if your sister's doing it, or your brother, hey, it's done. There's nothing for me to do. Siblings not realizing that this is a major family passage that affects everyone. And it's critical that everyone be involved in some way. Trap 3. Trap 3 is for caregivers, and you can especially help them with this. This is a really hard one. Caregivers not knowing what they really want from their siblings. Now, did Stan know he wanted mainly thanks and validation? I don't think so, not until he got it. So caregivers need to ask themselves, and you need to help them discover this. Do they want primarily emotional support like Stan, to be appreciated, to be thanked, to have their sister call them once a week and say, not just how's Dad doing, but how are you doing? Is there anything I can do? To have a person to vent to, say, Mom's driving me crazy, you know what she's like. So, is emotional support primarily what they want? Or do they want help with tasks, either close up or long distance? Because with a little imagination and cooperation, there are so many things that families can do long distance using technology, even the telephone. Or many caregivers feel, you know what, I've got this under control. I don't want anybody messing with what I put in place, but boy, would it be great to have some money to hire help for services. That would be great. Or, and this one takes some real soul-searching for caregivers and real probing from professionals who work with them. That do you, as the caregiver, want to hold on to some part of the status quo, even the part you're complaining about? Now, there are many satisfactions caregivers get from their role. Some are conscious, some are not conscious. Some are healthy and constructive, but there are some that make things harder for the caregiver. They affect whether they ask for help or even whether they accept help when offered. Now, some of the healthier satisfactions they get include the need to care, to love, to give back to the person who cared for them, the need to have to feel they are doing something worthwhile and important. But there are many other, often not conscious satisfactions they get from the role, motivations that can be very problematic. The need to get the love you never felt you received. The need to keep being the family workhorse because that's the most familiar role to you. The need to be the best child. So caregivers need to ask themselves, do you want to hold on to some aspect of the way things are, even though you're complaining about it, to keep the deep satisfactions of caring for a parent, the feeling of being important to your parents, even if you're honest with yourself, being the most important one. If caregivers can identify some of their own hidden satisfactions, and by the way, people who read my book tell me they often see this better in themselves when they read the stories of other people. If caregivers can understand what's really driving them, all the things that are driving them, then they can make better choices. So that was trap 3, caregivers not being sure what they want. Trap 4 is for everyone in the family. This is a common belief passed down in families from generation to generation, almost as if it's a sacred motto that came from the Bible. I shouldn't have to ask. I've heard this so often that I'm going to bet that even some of you listening today hold this belief. Well, here's what I can tell you from talking to so many families. It doesn't work, and it brings many families to grief. So I'd like to ask you to re-examine this belief now and what it implies, and to help caregivers do this if they hold this belief. It implies first that your sister or brother should read your mind and know what you need, even though they're struggling with their own lives and problems, even though you yourself may not be exactly sure what you want from them and may be sending mixed messages. Second, I shouldn't have to ask implies something even more destructive to families, an interpretation. If my sibling were a loving daughter, a good sister, a decent fill-in-the-blank, he or she would know what to do it and just do it. Stan, for example, believed, incorrectly, that if his sister cared about him and their father, she would want to be involved, and automatically, as the night follows the day, give him what he needed. Therefore, she must not care about them. Not true, as you have heard. Trap 5. Trap 5 is where you end up if you've stepped into traps 1, 2, 3, or 4. I call it getting caught in the anger guilt gridlock. People think, if I make my brother feel guilty, he'll do what I think is right. Now, this has a certain logic to it. It seems to make sense. Well, problem is, it doesn't usually work so well. Guilt feels uncomfortable. It makes people want to defend ourselves. Some sociologists did a study. They found that when caregivers tried to make their siblings feel guilty, the siblings defended themselves in many, many ways, rationalizing about why they shouldn't help or their help wasn't needed, minimizing what their sister was doing. Hey, she's not doing so much. Why should I feel bad? Criticizing. She's not even doing it right. Withdrawing, as I did, or getting paralyzed, as Leslie did, or, very common, getting angry back and attacking. So here's how the anger guilt gridlock works. Now, this happens in any relationship, but it's especially common in families with aging parents. One person, the caregiver, consciously or not, says or does things to make their siblings feel guilty. They respond by not doing what she wants, maybe even criticizing her. She feels more resentful, more angry, lays on more guilt, they defend, and on. And there they are, stuck in the anger guilt gridlock. So, these are the traps. Trap 1, not talking early with the whole family and not including everyone. Trap 2, siblings thinking the job is taken care of and not realizing they need to be involved in some way. Trap 3, caregivers not being really sure what they want and sending mixed messages. Trap 4, believing I shouldn't have to ask and not asking in some constructive way. Trap 5, getting caught in the anger, guilt, gridlock. So, there they are. They're stuck. Is it possible to escape? Well, the answer is a resounding maybe. As you know, family dynamics are very complicated with long, long histories. And there are some families where the bitterness and the anger and the guilt is so deep that those families will not get out. But in the vast majority of families, I believe, if one person changes their attitude or what they do, even a little bit, that can help the family move forward. Let me give an example. I call this story The Three Sisters. Now, that's a play by Chekhov. This is not that play, although there's plenty of drama seething under the surface in this story. These three sisters were really close and really loved each other, yet they did not speak to each other for a whole year after their mother's funeral. Now, these are the three sisters. Catherine was the caregiver. She was the middle sister. Now, she was the closest to her mom. She was Mom's soulmate. Everything Mom loved, she loved. Everything Mom thought was right, she thought was right. They were a good church-going family. Catherine, she married the minister's son. She was perfect. Her older sister, Sharon, was the rebel. She fought her mother from the moment she was born right through to her 60s when their mom needed care. She just thought everything her mom believed was wrong, and she wasn't going to buy it. Younger sister Evie, much younger, she had looked around her as younger siblings often do, and she realized, I don't have to do everything Mom says, but I also don't have to make a big fuss about it. So she learned to get along, and she was neither rebellious, and, she just got along. Now, when Mom was widowed, Catherine said, I have an idea. I think Mom should move in with me. Great idea, everybody said. No, it really made sense because they had the best relationship. Catherine had the support of husband, the minister, teenage kids who liked their grandma, an extra room, and it worked out great for a number of years. But then Mom had a stroke, and she didn't get better. And she was in that back room needing more and more care, being less and less communicative. And after a while, Catherine found it exhausting. She was sad, she was lonely, and she began to be resentful because her sisters who lived in different cities were not in it with her in some way. So here's what she did. She sent them magazine articles about how tough it is to care for an aging parent. Every once in a while, she'd call them up and say, Mom needs more attention from you, when they knew perfectly well their mother scarcely noticed whether they were there or not. Then twice a year, she would call them up and say, listen, we have to be away for 5 days or a week. We're going to a wedding, a conference. Will one of you come? And one of them always did come and stay with their mom. Yet, after the funeral, Catherine was incredibly bitter, and she said to me, my sisters were remarkably not there for me. So she and I talked, and I asked her a lot of questions about what she did, what she didn't do, and I got the information that I just gave you about what she did and didn't do. About a week later, she called me, and she said, I realized something. I had a role in what happened, a role in what I did and didn't get from my sisters. Now, she didn't stop being hurt, and she didn't stop being angry, but that one realization gave her an opening out of the anger, guilt, gridlock. So here's what she did. She called her sisters. Well, she didn't actually call them. She called their work answering machines late at night. And she left them each a message saying, look, I really miss you. I'd like to get together with you and talk about what happened with Mom and why we're not speaking to each other. Each of her sisters called her crying and said, yes, let's get together. And they arranged to meet at a hotel in a city they could all get to and spend overnight. So they got together, and Catherine explained to them how abandoned she had felt and how alone she had felt with her mother and with her grief and with all the difficulties of caregiving. Her older sister, Sharon, said, I don't regret what I did or didn't do for Mom. I felt what I did was appropriate given our relationship. But I was so caught up in fighting Mom that I didn't see what you needed, and I am so sorry. Little sister Evie said, I sent you cards, and you never responded. And Catherine just rolled her eyes and said, those cheery cards you sent me were so not where my head was at. I just couldn't deal with them. But I should have responded, and I should have told you what I was going through. So they talked about a lot of things in their family. There were a few subjects they didn't go near, and they agreed that they would get together at least once a year like this and talk. And then they went shopping. Now, I'd like you to imagine the same family, but their mother was suffering not from a stroke but from dementia. How would their situation have been the same? How would it have been different? Now, all of the relationship issues with which they struggled, all that old history, that would have been there. All the communication issues that got in their way, those would have been there. But in addition, they would have been struggling with many other challenges, including one huge emotional challenge, what family therapist Pauline Boss calls ambiguous loss. When Mom or Dad has dementia, they're physically present right there with you, but over time, you lose the person they were, the person you know. They are here, yet not here, not in the way they were. This ambiguity is hard for us, especially in our culture. We like to know. We like certainty, black or white. So one person in a family just decides, my mom is still here. Even though she hasn't said my name for 2 years, I see the light in her eyes whenever I walk into the room. Her brother decides, Mom is gone. She checked out years ago. And it's just too painful for me to see her and sit there with that empty shell that used to be my mom. So, if these three sisters had been dealing with dementia, Catherine, who'd always been so close to her mom, might have felt Mom was still there and needed to see her children. Sharon, who'd had the most troubled relationship with her mom, might have coped with her dementia by saying, my mom is gone, and now it's even more painful to see her. I just can't say yes when Catherine asks me to spend a week there. Evie might have been able to tolerate the ambiguity a little better, or at least not find it so unbearably painful to be with Mom. She might have gone, but been angry with Sharon because she was such a bad daughter never to come to see Mom. Some siblings will respond with complete denial as long as they can, maybe for years. And there are also other challenges that individuals in the family feel. Any person in the family may feel conflicted about their own feelings. Is it okay to grieve now? Mom's still alive, yet some of her is gone, and I do want to grieve. Am I a bad person? Because sometimes I think it would be better if Mom died. The important thing to help family members realize is that all these feelings and ways of coping are normal, that they should not judge each other because nobody is right and nobody is wrong. So, how to handle this really hard stuff? 1, accept that a sibling's reaction is normal, as is one's own. Don't judge. 2, be patient with denial. Each person will come to the reality in their own time. Out-of-towners may take longer. 3, ask family members who cannot spend time alone with the parent face-to-face to do other things to help. Handle finances, insurance, pay for services, or respite. whatever is needed that doesn't involve with being with the parent, and to help them get help and resources from the experts like the Alzheimer's Association and from some of your own agencies. But family members, whether dealing with dementia or not, still have to deal constructively with the communication dynamics of the family. So if a caregiver reaches the point, and maybe you can help them reach this point where they know what they want and they're willing to ask for it, what are the most effective ways to ask for it? Now, I want to acknowledge it can be hard to ask for what we need. It's a cultural thing. It's a woman's thing. It's not only a woman's thing. But I can tell you what worked in families that I interviewed. Don't hint. Ask directly. I can't tell you when I give talks how many people laugh when I mention that Catherine sent her sister magazine articles. People do this, and they think that this is a way of asking for help. When the sibling gets a magazine article or a website link saying, you know, this is a hard thing, it makes them feel guilty, but it does not tell that person what the caregiver wants. So don't hint. Be specific about what you want. Do you want companionship and weekly calls? Do you want help with paperwork? Be specific about when you want something. The one thing that Catherine did get from her sisters was, can you come from August 9th to August 14th for this reason? She always got that. However, people also need to be realistic about what they ask. And when I say realistic, I don't just mean about where your brother lives or how many children your sister has. I mean realistic about the relationships in the family. So, for example, super realistic woman, she said to me, my mother is a piece of work and my brother can't stand her. So I called my brother and I said, listen, Mom needs care. I'll take care of it. But I can't pay for it all. Will you send me a check every month? And he did. And 6 months later, he called and said, how you doing? And those siblings became very good friends, because what she didn't do was just as important as what she did. She recognized the reality of the relationships. She did not say, you're a bad son, you're a terrible brother, you're a nasty so-and-so. She accepted what was. Now, being realistic, I want to acknowledge being realistic about your own family can be really hard, because sometimes the reality is that no matter what you do, you will never make your mother happy. Maybe all of her losses have made that impossible. Or maybe she was never happy to begin with and you can't make her happy. And maybe you'll never have the closeness with your brother that you've been yearning for. But accepting these realities, hard as it is, can bring relief and help you make better choices. And finally, I would say that if there is still family conflict, call in the ref. Nobody can see their own family clearly, even professionals. And as you know, there are so many elder professionals now who can help families get together, talk about what needs to be done, distribute responsibilities, diffuse conflict. And man, I know that my sister and I sure could have used some help. And I just want to tell you that my sister and I did finally get together. When my dad died, I got the news from her best friend, and I heard my sister in the background crying, is she coming? Is she coming? And when I got there, she threw her arms around me and said, we're the only ones left. Well, it wasn't as easy as that, but I ended up apologizing to my sister for what I had not done and my lack of involvement. But in the course of learning all this, I also learned to forgive myself, because what happened in my family, what happened in everyone's family, is way bigger than any one person's mistakes and way more complex. And it really helps to know that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Russo. I am going to, at this time, forward our slides to the SurveyMonkey link, and I'm going to open it up if anyone has any questions. I'm going to ask that you type them in now. And Dr. Russo, that was great information, not just for our clients, but also in our everyday lives, our personal lives. So do we have any questions? And I do want to say I hope everyone goes out and purchases Dr. Russo's book. They're Your Parents Too. It sounds like it's got a lot of information in there that we all could use, and maybe with a little sense of humor in there too.
Yes, people do say that they think it'll be a downer, but that it ends up being a very good read.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. All right. Well, it seems like we did have one question, but you answered it along the way. Cindy had wanted to... Yes,
and there are other strategies. There are many bits of practical advice, not just about caregiving, but all of the other issues. For example, there's a chapter specifically on dementia and on who gets the power of attorney and how that should be handled, and the family dynamics around each issue.
All right, and here we have one from Willie. She says, or that person says, no question, just a comment. You are right on your observations, and I am recommending your book to my families.
Oh, that's great.
And that is great. That's how I actually found Dr. Russo. One of my colleagues here at the Rosalind Carter Institute had the book on her desk. And when I came across this topic, she said, here, try to get Dr. Russo, and I did. All right, here we go.
Pleasure.
Yep, Kathy has a question. This is just so point on as far as what actually happens in families. This is truly a real in families and with caregivers. And it is. You gave a lot of good points, and everyone always likes hearing about what actually happens in families. So we thank you again for that.
Well, I went to the source and talked to the families, and believe me, it's very enlightening to speak to different members of the same family and get the differing points of view and realize how they could get together, and they're doing things that are preventing it.
That's right. One thing that you said is everybody kind of hears something different sometimes, and what you see and what you feel is not necessarily the same as the person standing right next to you. Here we have Ava. Can I have my siblings access this presentation on the website? Yes, ma'am. Probably on Friday we will have it archived on the Rosalind Carter website, and I will also send out the link to everyone that received these emails initially for this webinar. So, all right. If there's no other questions, I'm going to let Dr. Russo go. She needs to get warm up there in New York City. And we do thank you very much, Dr. Russo, and I will be in touch.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.